only currency world over which kept pace with the dollar because the dollar was hardening. It's only when the Chinese devaluation took place in August last year that the rupee started shaking. And if you do a comparison of all global currencies vis-a-vis the dollar, which has weakened in the last couple of months, in fact, rupee has weakened the least amongst most of them. Currencies as in Brazil, Russia have weakened hugely. Other countries have also weakened. And against most of the currencies, rupee hasn't weakened. And therefore, to use the word free fall as far as the rupee is concerned would not be a fair.
That's semantic. So you're saying that the rupee, it's about because of international cues. It's not because of the real value of the rupee being low.
You see, rupee will eventually find its own value in the international market. It will depend on the strength of our economy and what is our ability to attract dollars into the economy.
I mean, Mr. Jaitley, a big issue that people face is corruption. You know, corruption is the biggest scourge in this country. And I've seen recent figures and we can congratulate ourselves, and I think you've done a good job quite clearly in the last 18 months that we've gone from, I think 85 to 76 in terms of where we stand in the Transparency International Index. But if you ask this audience today, Mr. Jaitley, corruption is still the biggest scourge. You've done a great job, direct tax, direct transfers, you had a transparent bidding process. It's fantastic. But the trouble that people face, the local police inspector, the local excise inspector, some government official who needs to give clearances and approvals, deep down, the one question that people would want to ask you is, do you need a more comprehensive, stringent kind of policy to tackle corruption?
I thought when you mentioned corruption, you were about to compliment us. Because if there is one significant change which has taken place in the last 1.5 years in India, it's in this field. Now let me just tell you, does anybody talk in New Delhi about political corruption? Does anybody speak in terms of files pending for months and months together for collateral reasons? Are FIPB and environment, which are the two important clearances in Delhi, in a single case being held up for the reasons they were held up in the past? Nobody even whispers this. Also, mind you, institutional mechanisms are now being created where discretions are eliminated. Now, almost each one of the largest by the state, be it mineral, be it coal, be it iron ore, be it spectrum, today the rule is auction. You don't even have, the personal interaction with the government has been completely eliminated. You can sit in your office and just bid as far as your laptop is concerned. Right. But let me tell you, aware of what happens at the ground level and so on, we've been trying our level best. For instance, even in the departments which had a very bad name like taxation departments. Today we are trying to move to a system where you file your returns online. Your queries will be online. Your assessment orders will be online. And your refunds will be online. We've almost, last year for example, 1.34 lakh people got their refunds online. And therefore there is nobody who comes to you and then asks for a kickback. Now those kind of systems are slowly being introduced as far as the government is concerned. Of course, at the lower level you still have black sheep. And therefore, you'll have to go hard as far as those systems.
Can you get them online as well?
I can probably make sure that with the vigilant media they'll be on screen.
Great. Great. So, Mr. Jaitley, ask everyone, I think you're batting very well, Mr. Jaitley. I'm trying to find out what you call the style of batting. It's a mix between Sehwag and Gavaskar. Mr. Jaitley, the big concern is jobs. One of the biggest challenges that your government faces and your main objectives of this government is job creation and it is skill generation. You have set yourself a target in this respect, but my question pertains to workers who are skilled and unemployed. The biggest concern is when you are generating skills on a daily basis in this country, And I was looking, according to the Labour Bureau, the rate of unemployment among those who got formal training from the industrial training institutes of skill centers is a worrying 14.5%. That's a huge number of skilled unemployed. I appreciate, and you're saying I'm not complimenting you enough. There is always a compliment, and then there's a question which follows, Mr. Jaitley. I appreciate your commitment to skill development. But what about the crores of skilled unemployed who are also coming out into our system? It can lead to other issues.
I think if you closely followed what the Prime Minister said yesterday, between the lines, as I understood this, I think the answer to your question lay there. Obviously, governments have a limited capacity to create jobs. Governments having a limited capacity to create jobs, even private sector, when I speak in terms of structured private sector, will have its own limitations.
Sure.
Even if you expand in your manufacturing by 8 or 9%, there will be a limit to the level of jobs that they can create. And therefore, having realized this, the emphasis of the government in the last 1.5 years has been, A, what you mentioned, to skill people. B, as economy expands, they'll get jobs. If you have more cities, for instance, being created, you'll probably have more jobs. These are centers of economic activity. At the same time, you'll also have to strengthen your SMEs, your informal sectors. And therefore, in each one of this, what does the Mudra scheme aim at? Crores of people in this country will now get small loans from the banks. No security to be given, moderate interest rates, otherwise they were going to money lenders at 25 and 30%, and set up their own shops, set up their own establishments, set up their own some small workshops. And I must say, over the last few months, these have been runaway successful schemes. You have what is, at the end of the day, Startup India. What is Stand Up India? You are looking at women entrepreneurs, SC and ST entrepreneurs. In startup, you are looking for technology-oriented entrepreneurs, giving them tax breaks, giving them a funding mechanism. So this whole emphasis of funding these unfunded sections of society, that besides the structured employment coming from private sector and the state sector, you will have to generate a huge amount of economic activity at the ground level, that people are in a position to employ themselves and probably create a job or two.
Mr. Jaitley, why do you think the markets hit 24,000 in January 7th this year? Is it a consequence of global factors alone, or is it because the euphoria and high expectations when you came to power have ebbed down a bit? How do you
I think the slowdown in the global economy, just as the oil prices favored us, is an adverse side. The first adverse side is what you mentioned, the shrinkage of the global trade and the exports. The second is that the global markets have all been very choppy. The global economy is integrated, and any development in any part of the world is going to impact on markets. It may also impact on currencies. And therefore, if something happens in Greece, or something happens in Europe, or the interest rates go up in the United States, or there is a weakening of currencies or a slowdown in China, this is going to have ripples across the global market. And it is these factors, so impact on markets, impact on currencies, has certainly not been because of domestic economic factors.
Right. Mr. Jaitley, when you said in January 2015 that retrospective tax is a closed chapter, won't be opened up again, then that was great, because you were promising a stable, predictable and a competitive tax regime which you're working for. But there have been some times you get a feeling there's a disconnect between the intent and the action on the ground. Case in point is the MAT imbroglio on FIIs. My question to you is, what steps will you take to ensure that the tax department does not exceed its mandate and aligns itself to the government's vision of the taxation system?
See, at the end of the day, the tax department has a clear mandate. The clear mandate is that taxes which are payable, they must collect. And if they take steps to collect taxes which are payable, I don't think it's any form of an excess. At the end of the day, the nations which you represent also run on taxes.
You do as well, Mr. Jaitley.
And they run on taxes. and the government must have legitimate taxes. But at the same time, there must be no unfair taxation.
Yeah.
In fact, this government has been candid enough to say from day one, and I've repeated this repeatedly, that whenever there is an unfair assessment order,
Right.
it doesn't bring you revenue, it brings you a bad name.
Right.
Because ultimately we are a rule of law society, some court or tribunal intervenes, stays that fact.
Right.
And in all those controversial assessments which were passed during the last government, or in a carry forward of what the steps the last government took, not 1 rupee till date has come into the coffers of the government. So the retrospective taxation brought us a bad name. It became a defining moment against India. It didn't bring us tax. A large number of those transfer pricing cases,
Yes.
many of them didn't bring us any tax, but they brought us a bad name.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with this situation? Because this was a real mess on the table
Yeah.
when the new government came over. So we promised we won't have any retrospective taxation. We haven't had it.
Yeah.
We promised that no new notices will be sent
Yes.
in those old legislations, and we stood by that. Now, a number of issues as an after effect of what had been done previously came up. We allowed courts to settle those disputes. Courts inevitably decided against the government because they found these were unfair demands. We had the best of legal consultations, took the matters to the cabinet and decided not to agitate those matters further, put a quietus to it. As a spiral effect of that, dozens of cases are now getting settled. Secondly, even when those issues of MAT, etc. came up, we resorted to other instruments, appointing an expert committee under the chairmanship of
Yes.
the chairman of the Law Commission, or even asking some eminent judge to mediate a taxation dispute. Now we've been trying to put each one of those issues in place. And today, as the two of us speak, 18 or 19 months after this government has taken over, there are about 2 or 3 of those issues left. Personally, I would like to see them being sorted out as expeditiously as possible.
That's great.
Either through a tribunal or a judicial process, and whatever way the courts will decide, we'll accept it. Please remember one fact. Governments have no power to set aside an assessment order. It can only be set aside by a judicial proceeding. And therefore, there will have to be a due process which is carried out.
Yes.
And only then, if the assessee is able to establish that this is an unfair
Yeah.
order, we'll accept that verdict.
Now, you know, I've been given this chit some 5 minutes back, and there's a time limit on this. So I'll tell you what the nation really wants to know. No, I won't tell you, I'll ask you. You see, there was an at-home at the Rashtrapati Bhavan a few days back, and we have several informers around who's trying to find out who's talking to whom. You were talking to Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. And there were all cameras trained in that direction, Mr. Jaitley, trying to figure out that if we had some kind of radio frequency which could spy in on the conversation, we would have. So what the nation wants to know, Mr. Jaitley, is whether that conversation was about GST. And if it was not, then why not? So, Mr. Jaitley, now, I've been very patient for the last half an hour. And my patience is running out. And so you need to get to this question very quickly.
Let me tell you,
Yes.
these are informal occasions, and it's not necessary that you get into any political discussion at these forums. I certainly didn't have any political discussion with her. It's a different matter with many colleagues in the Congress party. I have been discussing GST in the past, but certainly this was not one of the subjects I discussed.
How frustrating has it been to not have the GST bill passed this year? This was meant to be, Mr. Jaitley, one of the headline reforms to materialize of this government. Will the GST bill pass in the upcoming session? How delayed is the rollout going to be?
It was an important reform of the UPA government.
Sure.
So if I have to credit the authorship of the bill, I have to credit it to them.
Yes.
Now, if the author turns against his own script,
Yes.
how do I make him see reason?
No, but you've reached out. Are they seeing reason?
I have reached out, I have spoken to them, I have visited them, I have explained to them. And I think, I hope they'll see this.
Did you reach out too late?
I don't think that's factually correct, because session after session we've been speaking to them. Initially when the bill was introduced, they said, not this session, the next session. And then suddenly after 2 or 3 sessions, those 3 new objections came.
Yes.
I even have had a discussion with the colleagues in the Congress party on each of those 3 ones, and I hope they are flexible and see the rationale behind passing the GST. Yeah. After all, each one of them goes against the grain of what they themselves had drafted.
You know what I'm saying, and I want to conclude with this, Mr. Jaitley, that the fact is that, ahead of every session, people want to see consensus emerge. I'm sure that you want to see consensus emerge, and nobody wants a situation of distress where the opposition, however small, blocks what is happening in Parliament. We've spoken about it. On my show, you've spoken about it. The frustration that you experience. But how long will this continue?
You must keep one fact in mind. Every political party except the Congress is actively supporting it, including the UP allies. So even the RJD, the NCP, the JDU, they've said that they are openly supporting this bill. Each one of them has made statements. So there is not a single political party who goes with them. Every state, because this impacts on revenues of the states, including the Congress states, are actively supporting this legislation. Now, having said this, and then having said that, I credit them with the authorship, because ultimately it is Mr. Chidambaram who in 2006 in the budget announced that they will start working on this and created the Empower Committee. Mr. Mukherjee introduced the bill in 2011. Now, having done all this, I don't see any reason why they should have a rethink on the bill at all. If there is a discussion over one particular idea in the bill, etc., I am certainly willing to discuss with them. But anything which makes it a flawed legislation, certainly we can't bind future generations with a flawed legislation.
So there's been no movement, it's still where it was.
So we've been discussing with a large number of them, and as the parliament session comes, we also discuss. And don't forget one factor, that at the end of the day, it's very good to have laws passed by consensus. And a law like this, which impacts on the taxation structure of India, being passed by concession, that would be our preference. Otherwise, it can be put to vote.
From the point of view of the economy and business, and last question on this one is, now we keep hearing, it used to be Congress versus all, now it's BJP versus all. Is BJP versus all a good situation? From the country's economic point of view, we've seen this political polarization.
I think on all economic legislations, it has never been BJP versus all. In fact, this government has been so gracious with the states that every regional party which may be supporting us or may not be supporting us has normally supported all our legislations in Parliament. So when the mining law was passed, when the coal auction law was passed, when the GST is being discussed, from the BSP to the Samajwadi to the Trinamool to the AIDMK to Biju Janata Dal to the JDU, every political party, NCP, has been supporting us. Because we've been gracious in sharing that revenue or the proceeds of all this with the states. There is not a single regional party which has been against us. So even in the coal mine law, the mining law and the GST law, Congress stands alone without even its allies.
Okay. So Mr. Jaitley, I thank you all very much for your time. You've taken the questions very well. We've had a great conversation. And I think you've been fairly candid this morning. It's not, I was wanting to tell you that it's not February yet. Maybe you can reveal a little bit more. But I don't think I'll win that one. Thank you, Mr. Jaitley. Thank you very much.